Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Memo Creative Festival podcast, where we discuss big ideas around creativity, culture, and how that shapes the way we live, work, and connect. I'm one of your hosts, Taylor Pfeifer, and I'm here with my co-host, Brooke Hoffos. Today, we are interviewing Leland Maschmeyer.
Leland is the CEO and co-founder of Collins, a globally recognized brand and design consultancy, self-described as a transformation consultancy, having worked with companies like Spotify, Bose, Nike, Coca-Cola, Instagram, and Dropbox. Alongside his partner Brian Collins, their agency has been named Design Firm of the Year by both Ad Age and DNED, and consistently ranked among Fast Company's most innovative companies.
2016, Leland stepped away from Collins to join Chobani Yogurt as their chief creative officer and later chief brand officer, where he helped lead one of the most incredible and well-celebrated brand transformations, dare I say, of all time. He played a pivotal role in expanding Chobani from a single product business into a billion-dollar wellness platform. And after 5 years at Chobani, Leland returned to Collins as CEO, where he continues to push the boundaries of brand strategy, design, and cultural relevance.
Along the way, Leland has been named a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader, a Master of Marketing by ANA, and a Design Thinking Leader by IBM. He's also the co-founder of Sway, which is a seaweed-based products company that provides alternatives to plastic and serves on boards and initiatives focused on design ethics and sustainability. Leland isn't just designing identities. He's helping build the systems that shape how we live, create, and connect. Leland, welcome to the Memo Show.
Thanks for having me.
We're happy to have you here. We're curious. Are you working on any interesting projects lately? What's been going on your end?
Yeah, my problem is that I tend to work on too many projects that are interesting from my perspective. So that's always a hard thing to focus on. But yeah, tons of really interesting stuff across a very large bandwidth of diversity. But from my perspective, it's all just design applied to different fields at different levels and stuff. So it's all very exciting for me.
That's cool. Is there any one that you can share that right now that you're working on, or anything top secret that you can't?
I'm trying to think of like anything that's like public. Usually I can't fully talk about it, but I'll talk about it in the generic. So,
Okay, cool.
Working on launching a beauty brand that is centered on scientific advancements and innovations brought by AI-driven science. So first of its kind, first to the world type of beauty science. Working on a major kind of Fortune 50 revamping their innovation and how they think of innovation. Working with a deep tech company in the energy tech space. And what's really interesting about that particular space is just how important energy software, energy as a service, energy infrastructure is to our future. And it's something that like not a lot of people pay attention to, but it is just a endlessly fascinating space that is in many ways very much in desperate need of design and an approach to design. So anyway, those are just like a few that are very exciting.
That's awesome.
That's great. Have you, you mentioned AI, and I mean, that's a hot topic right now. And I bet you a lot of these companies are asking about that and how you may integrate that into your workflow and how you potentially use that as a strategy with what you're doing and how that sort of integrates with design. Could you like just share with us how Collins and maybe yourself are thinking around that and how you integrate AI? Is that a core service offering that's being sort of integrated into everything you do? Or is it something that you're just having sort of a question with your client to see if that's something they even want to explore first?
Yeah, like I think like most people, we have no concrete answers on exactly how AI should be implemented, exactly how it should be used. I mean, it's not only is the technology changing every day, but it's a lot of people are approaching AI from like a task-based efficiency technology, like
Right.
it helped me do something better.
Yeah.
or a collaborative paradigm of, well, I was working with this person to do stuff, but now I'm going to work with AI to do it. And then some people look at it as like outsourcing. I
Yeah.
don't need a team anymore. I can just outsource
Mm-hmm.
it to AI. And look, I think a lot of those patterns of interaction, patterns of use are okay in the near term, as effectively we've picked up this foreign piece of alien technology and we're trying to figure out what to do with it. But AI is really going to be transformative to workflows and organizational structures and mental models. And so, yeah, we're doing stuff in the space of like, how do we use it to speed up a task? How do we get it to find image reference for us faster? Because oftentimes finding image reference takes longer than actually designing the solution. Of course, we're doing all that because that's like working with training wheels with AI.
Mm-hmm.
But we're having a lot of conversations, and they're not necessarily landing anywhere. They're just really explorative conversations around like, how does this completely rebundle how we put teams together? How does this change the way that we approach a workflow? Like, how do you take something that might have taken 5 months and do it in 5 days? And like asking ourselves those questions, not because we're going to do it that way, not because we want to compress the time, but because asking those questions, those kind of orders of magnitude change questions, gets us to think differently about how we could do something so that we're thinking in big exponential leaps to really interesting places, as opposed to like incremental efficiency improvements of like, how do I speed up this task that I do in my traditional workflow? And so that's just the way that we're kind of approaching it. And we're not trying to lock anything down. We just
Mm-hmm.
want to stay open and exploratory and experimental.
Absolutely. That's really interesting. And Collins is built on this notion that design is not about how something looks. It's about how something works, and design isn't what you make; it's what you make possible. Every time I go on LinkedIn, Brian's posting something about that, and just sort of the intrinsic value of what design is. It's not about the aesthetic, right? It's much bigger than that. Do you think AI could be similar to that? Like AI isn't necessarily about what you make; it's about what you make possible. Are those interchangeable?
Yeah, 100%. Like, look, design, the definition of design, and I will die on this hill. The definition of design is the creation of intentional change. And so, regardless of what discipline in design you are working in, you are trying to create intentional change, positive, desirable, intentional change. And so you may do it through different vernacular, different forms. You know, graphic design does it differently than architecture, does it differently than product design, but you're all trying to create desirable, positive change. Um, and the form, the visuality of it is fundamentally critical to creating that change, because it makes tangible and manifest a future state that other people can experience and get excited about. You know, it's one of those whole things like, I won't believe it until I see it. You know, to modify that phrase, I won't change until I see that it's better. And
Mm.
so design makes positive change for a future state desirable, visible, tangible, believable. So when you start from that first principle of design, AI can really enhance the ability to create desirable change. And so I gave a talk at the DNAD about one very specific way that this could potentially happen. And I won't go into the whole talk, but the main point of it is we have to start thinking of identity systems, because we work a lot in the brand identity space. We have to start thinking of identity systems not as an alphabet of colors and shapes and effectively visual components to create a symbolic language that expresses an idea. It's not that that's wrong. It's just that that's not the full extent of the possibilities behind creating brand identity systems. And so when you bring AI into that provocation, why couldn't an identity system have AI agents? Why couldn't an identity system have subsystems of routines that solve or execute parts of an identity program to increase operations, to offload the cognitive complexity of trying to onboard onto an identity system. Because anyone who's worked at a large company and received traditional PDF guidelines from an agency would say, this is a lot to digest and a
Yeah.
lot to figure out. So what if those guidelines came with an AI agent that
Yeah.
rather than having to read and practice the guidelines, onboarded you to it much faster and much more iteratively and much more in a outcome focused way for what you're trying to do than before. So that's not AI being incongruent with design. In fact, that's AI helping design better live into its promise of change, promise of positive change, because it's minimizing the adaptability complexities of a system. It's enhancing potentially what a system can do when it is implemented and so on. And so I see a lot of really useful impact of AI in the design space that isn't about replacing what designers do. It's really about augmenting and exponentially enhancing what we always should have been doing and for many people are doing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's super interesting, and just touching on your talk that you gave at D&AD in London, and this idea of brand being bigger than just the identity system, it really is, and I think that that's a really interesting thing to think about how AI might integrate into brand, and I think that definitely is sort of the future of what brand is. At the end of the day, though, it's about human beings and sort of commanding attention from them, and this idea of sort of deploying or tapping into these emotional states of people wherever they're at, and it's almost impossible to figure that out at any given time where one sort of individual is at versus another through hyper targeting or AI and those things. So we have to build brands that are sort of going to appeal to broad strokes of people still. And I think that's just important to think about brand as this idea of something that people are emotionally connected to. And there's this sort of quote from, I think it's from Michael Beirut at Pentagram. He talks about brand as this idea of it not being a diving contest, but rather a swimming contest. So it's not about making this big splash and this big sort of like movement that people attach themselves to. It's a marathon, you know. It's about this like idea of longevity and tying yourself to something that's going to or build something rather that's going to last for a long time. Do you see brands still being that way? Like even with AI and future technologies and all the things that you're talking about, at the very core, is brand still sort of about just kind of connecting to people where they're at?
Yeah, look, I think brand isn't going anywhere. As long as there are humans participating in the economy to some degree, brand will continue to exist. And I think the important thing here is to define, what do I mean by brand? A lot of people struggle to find agreement on what brand is, but this is the clearest, most concise way I can describe it. And again, this is another hill that I will die on. Um, but brand is differentiation. So here's what I mean by that. If your company is indistinguishable, your product is indistinguishable from everything else, what do we call that? We call that a commodity, right? But if you have something that differentiates you, whether you intentionally built that differentiation or other people slapped it on your product or brand, you have a brand. It is how people see you as different than the other options. Now, that difference in a mass media bulk attention by economy was typically attached to, what is your ad campaign? What is your persona? What is your voice? What is the purpose that that helps you stand apart in that type of media and communication infrastructural environment? But that is not the only way to create differentiation in your company. And so you can create differentiation at the corporate positioning level. Like, you could be a category of one and not comparable to anybody else. You could create differentiation in the product. It could have intrinsics to it. It could have an experiential quality to it. It could have a functional difference to it. And of course, yes, you can create it in terms of image. Like
Hmm.
everybody loves talking about liquid death, but that's effectively what they did. They sell water.
Yeah.
There's nothing intrinsically different about it. And so it becomes the cultural and symbolic meaning of liquid death. That when you carry the liquid death can, you're sort of in on the joke. You're in on, and you're showing off your kind of cultural awareness and understanding. It's not that liquid death tastes better. It's not that liquid death created a whole different business model for it to operate. So brand as a expression of that differentiation will always exist. And to kind of put a sharp point on this, it is going to be more important in an era of AI. And a lot of people are saying, oh, brand is dead in AI because AI is just going to tell me what to do. Yeah. If you see brand as like the veneer of a marketing communication, yeah, I understand that that's going to change and it's probably going to come down in importance. But when you understand brand as the expression of what differentiates you, if not the differentiation at any of those three places, brand is going to matter because what AI is the maximalist end state expression of the manufacturing era of capitalism. So manufacturing was all about how do you get people to do more with less human labor, right? So we built machinery that did it. Then we built digital that allowed us to do it with the knowledge economy. Now, with AI, you can replicate stuff, you can produce stuff with almost no time, no effort,
Yeah.
no human in the loop. And so we even have a term for it now. It's called slop, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
the world is going to be flooded with copycats. The world is going to be flooded with imitation content and stuff. And so we as humans constantly seek what is different.
Yeah.
Like we are
Got it.
programmed in our brain to seek what is different. So in a world of infinite copycats, where everything that you do can be copied, and I don't just mean in software and tech and digital media and stuff, I also mean in manufacturing.
Hmm.
Lots of manufacturing can be co-manufactured. So you make a great yogurt, cool. You can go to a competitor can go to a co-manufacturer and basically make something that is really, really close to what you made pretty quickly. And so what is going to matter in the AI future is costly differentiation. How can you build differentiation into your company that is costly for anyone to copy? That's the strategic thing. But ultimately, that differentiation is what is going to define what we call your brand, because it is
Hmm.
the thing that distinguishes it from being a commodity. So, in that sense, brand is going to be way more important than
Yeah.
ever before. And, brand took a hit during the whole performance marketing era. And it was sort of like, oh, well, it's not important. What really matters is digital media and being at the bottom of the funnel. But I actually think it's going to come back resurgently, particularly people who practice brand not just as aesthetics and superficial veneer for marketing communications, but practice brand as either finding or creating a costly differentiator for you, for your company, so that you can have long-term competitiveness and prevent anyone from copying you.
Yeah, that's really interesting because speaking on this differentiation, I'm thinking of your time at Chobani, um, and the brand transformation that you led there. So taking it as a product, a yogurt product to a platform. And I'm just curious, what does it take to shift public perception at that scale, like especially from the inside out?
Yeah, so the whole shifting from a product to a platform is a very common issue.
Hmm.
Um, and it was definitely what we had to tackle at Chobani. So when I joined, Chobani was more or less a one product company. They
Right.
had the core, it's called core Greek yogurt.
Hmm.
There was the Chobani Flip also at the time, which
Okay.
also was doing what was nowhere near the same size as the core product. And it was basically the core product with some pre-mixed toppings that you could put on it and stuff. But the challenge at that point was, like a lot of companies, they get to what's called product market fit. And what product market fit, everyone listening to this podcast has probably heard that term, but product market fit means you have made a product that people either repeatedly use or repeatedly buy. And so you have identified a market, however small, however big, but you have identified a market and a product that fits that market. Doesn't mean you're profitable. Doesn't mean you're going to be $1 billion company. It just means that you found a market with a fit and consistent repeat purchase or use. A lot of companies see that as they have made it. And
Mm.
so naturally, what they do is you scale up against that product, you scale up against, and you optimize the company for delivering that so you can start doing it more efficiently, more at a profit, and building a business model around that. But eventually the growth starts flattening out because what you've done is you've created evidence that there is a market for that type of product. And
Mhm.
that's particularly true like of people who've come up with something new or proved that there was a market when a lot of people didn't think there was a market. So all of a sudden, once you start growing, other competitors say, oh, okay, that's a market worth us investing now. So they start coming in and copying your product because your product has established um, the criteria for what that market wants. So copycats come in. And so that whittles down, that creates pricing pressure, it creates marketing pressure and costs, it increases your CAC and all this type of stuff. So a company has one of two choices. One is they just dig in and they compete harder and harder and harder on that product and try to win more market share, sort of like fighting in the mud for the knife against all your competitors. Really low level stuff. But the problem is once that happens is sales start to decline, decelerate. You start depending on discounting more. You've tried to innovate beyond that product by iterating on that product, but nothing really catches, nothing really grows. So you're losing all of this money to uh, failed innovations, and so your performance starts going down. Right. So I call that the product market fit trap, where you confuse the success of an initial wedge product with your long-term business model, your long-term strategy. So the other choice that people have is to say, well, wait, why are people buying this product?
Mhm.
Right? Because what a customer does is they don't buy your product, they buy the value they get from the product. What you make is not what people buy. So this is what I call value market fit. When you realize the broader value that people are getting from your product. And if you then start marketing against that value, start innovating against that value, even if it's a different product than your core product, but you are building an understanding with your customer base that this is what we sell. We sell this higher order value. So Nike doesn't sell shoes, they sell elite athletic performance. Right? So that allows them to move from running into basketball, from basketball into baseball, into all these football and all these other sports, because that is a transitive value that is experienced in their wedge product, but is desirable to other audiences. All of a sudden, your brand starts appealing to your non-core audiences. All of a sudden, you don't have to depend on discounting anymore because you're telling the value that people are seeking. And so you can potentially even raise prices. People's willingness to pay goes up. You start innovating stuff that actually works. And so you get this uptick from that. So when we were at Chobani and for lots of other organizations, we try to help companies find that value market fit. And the way that you do that is you get really close to the customer. You see the language that they're using around your product. You try to find the metaphor that they're using in the product. You try to find what's motivating them, use cases of it, cultural contexts, and when they're being drawn to it and stuff. And eventually you figure it out. So for Chobani, it was very apparent to me early on, which is it's a wellness company,
Hmm.
right? And when you took the lens of a wellness company and looked at everything was Chobani was doing beyond the product, because the product was all about clean label, accessible food, rich protein, um, and made with all natural ingredients. But then you looked at the business practices, taking care of employees. You look at the way they gave back to the community and stuff. Like this is all about wellness, not just in nutrition, but wellness in community, what financial wellness and all this other stuff. It was very clear that this was a wellness company whose initial wedge product was Greek yogurt. So we then took that and created a whole brand around asking the question, if Chobani is participating and a member of a wellness culture, how do we imagine and interpret what Chobani does and what makes it unique and special through the lens of wellness vernacular? And so, one of the things that was very clear was this sort of in the wellness uh, communities, people who really zeroed in on food. We did a little topology of different types of wellness communities focused on food. Was that they had this belief that good food had great power. And that was the way
Mm.
we kind of codified the whole idea, the whole ethos of the Chobani world, or the foodie world within that community. And ultimately, that speaks to a magic metaphor. So that started to drive our visual language. We went to fairy tale books, we went to folklore, we went to folk magic and drew inspiration from all of this. And so ultimately, really just tried to create a brand and a brand world that felt like magical. And we called it magical realism. And that informed everything that we did.
Mhm.
And then we created an innovation framework that allowed us to take what defined Chobani as a wellness brand and said, okay, which of these things that credibly define Chobani can be applied in other product categories in a way that isn't solving a product issue in these other product categories. So it allowed Chobani to move into oat milk, into creamer, into a probiotic kombucha style product. And so that's how we started finding and articulating the value market fit, and we experienced that up curve that I talked about.
Yeah. I personally love the brand. I've worked in packaging in the past and I've always admired Chobani. So it's great to hear more insight into that. And maybe a silly question, but like, not in just regards to Chobani, but maybe in projects in general. How do you know what you're doing is working along the way? And it might be like, that might be a silly question, but how do you kind of keep going in the direction you're heading as you're working through the design process of all of this?
Yeah. So, well, if you're doing something that other people have done before, you can measure yourself against that
Hmm.
because the path is laid out, the success
Mhm.
criteria is defined, and that gives you a very clear framework. I have always in my career tried to do stuff that people haven't done and tried to, in particular, do brand design work that is new and feels unique and special and stuff like that. So I think your question is really more around those types of moments when there is no path, there is no obvious criteria. So in those moments, it's nothing objective. It's all subjective. It's all signal based. And so you really don't know until you've done it a few times.
Mm.
And what I've learned in working across a lot of companies, I've learned that when you personally connect with it and get excited about it is a really good signal. That's the first really good signal. Because if your passion isn't connecting to what's happening, then it is a way of your body saying, this doesn't make sense. And sure, it may make sense to other people and they may argue, well, we should do X, Y, and Z. But if it's not making sense to you, the creator of it, you will feel that.
Mhm.
The second thing is that um, if you reach a point in a concept idea or a design and it just all of a sudden things just start working, you're like, it'll work this way there and it makes sense there. And
Hmm.
oh, it solves that problem and it does this. It all of a sudden becomes generative and easy and it just starts flowing out of you. Then, then you have it. Then you
Mm.
know
Mhm.
that it's something is working. Now, the client might not always necessarily approve it. That's a sell in issue.
Mhm.
Hmm.
But the thing that you're designing is working. And then finally, when you get to that sell in point, if you can't distill it down to something so simple of a framework of an idea of how to explain it, then it may be working, but you don't fully understand it yet.
Mm.
If you have to go through 80 pages of setup slides to explain it, or if you've presented it and the client is still asking tons of questions and you find yourself having to explain and argue for it, explaining means you're losing.
Mm.
Explaining means you didn't find the elegant essence of what you have created and are communicating it. You're still presenting something that's too complicated. So if you're able to just get it down to like super punchy and like, I got it, I get it, let's go. That's another signal that what you're doing is working.
That's great. I love what you just said when you're explaining you're losing. I think I'm gonna like tweet that out or something after this because that's a great quote by Leland Maschmeyer. You should put that on a T-shirt or something. Um, I think every brand needs to do that. There's a lot of overcomplication. There's a lot of like just over the top process or explanation or just over engineering that happens. And I think that it's all under the guise that we're like not trying to treat our customer as if they're stupid, and we want them to go through that journey almost, and we think and we believe that if they go through that journey that they're going to somehow like latch in more because they spent the time trying to figure it out, and therefore they will convert at the end or they will buy the product or service. But I think the opposite is true, and obviously you've had the experience with major brands to be able to experience that firsthand. It's almost about accessibility as much as it is simplicity, just making it available for people. And if it feels natural and normal and fun and easy, like people are going to buy the product at the end of the day. Um, I'm just curious. And so Collins has sort of this contrarian, and maybe this is just my opinion, but this beautiful sort of contrarian point of view, on most things. And Brian has a lot of, he's sort of famous for his LinkedIn posts, these sort of diatribes that he goes on, and we just love reading them over here at LMNO. We get a lot out of them, but I'm just curious from your point of view as Leland, is there anything that you would say, or is there any belief that you hold about design that you think most people would potentially disagree with?
Tough question. It's a tough question because I've never done a market assessment of some of the ideas that I hold. So, to me, they might seem like obvious and straightforward and even like pedestrian, but to other people, they might be head scratchers and be like, well, no, that's clearly
Mm.
stupid. Um, I, look, I think, well, I do think I've had people, put up their dukes when I've said brand is your differentiation.
Hmm.
Um, in fact, I don't even like using the word brand ever because I think it's misleading and confusing. And when you use the word brand, all of a sudden everyone's starting from a different starting line, running a different race.
Yeah.
And so if you're talking about differentiation, at least you get more people closer into something specific.
Mm.
But look, I think the thing that is probably going to gin up the most people mashing anger into their keyboards is probably my view that design has become commoditized and is losing its economic value rapid. And I think the design industry has confused intrinsic value with economic value.
Hmm.
So what does that mean? Design, something can be valuable. Water, you cannot go a day without water,
Mhm.
but it has very little economic value because it's everywhere.
Mhm.
I think design had a window between the early 90s and the mid 2010s. And I'm not counting product design, right? Digital product design has become its own thing. But I think there's a window that designers had an opportunity to um, build economic value around a very, very powerful discipline. And I think we fumbled it. I think we fumbled it because we wanted to preach the gospel of design and talk about why design matters and why things should be beautiful and why, you know, doing human-centered design and the beautiful world of design. I mean, we kept taking our grad school theses that we all learned in design school and preached to the world, trying to convert everyone to the intrinsic spiritual and cultural value of design, which is all true. I would not be here. I would not be talking about it. I would not be running everything that I do as a designer if I did not believe all that.
Mm.
Design is one of the most powerful disciplines, but there has not been effort put into making sure that what's called in business language, we capture the value of it.
Right.
Instead, we give it away.
Yeah.
We say, oh, we're really excited about this project. we'll do it for a minuscule amount because we just want the brand, that logo, or we just want to do it. Oh, museum, you don't have a huge budget to have us design something. That's okay. We'll do it for free. And we don't get into defense of our economic value. We haven't built business models that allow us to build sustainable, growing businesses around it, because people argue, that's design. We should care about design, not the commercial stuff, not the money, not the business part. I didn't get into design for that reason. You stay in design for that reason. You need a paycheck. You need reliable income. You need to work at a stable company who can invest in your career, in your knowledge, in supporting you on projects for you to do your best work. That all comes from a business model. That all comes from strong economics.
Would
And
you,
so,
I'm really interested in what you're saying there, because I think we're all trained as designers, especially these young people who are bright eyed and bushy tailed going into design. And it's like art for them, or it's
yeah,
a way for them to express. But what would you recommend to them, I guess, as like these designers who maybe want to commercialize their art or their communication platform? Is it important for them to also like do a program or go to school or learn business tactics at the same time? Or does that come
yeah,
after?
yeah. So like art informs design, but it's not design. You
Right.
can get a
Mhm.
Right.
lot from the world of art to be a better designer, but if you think design is just art practiced in the commercial space, you'll be really frustrated
Yeah.
and
You'd be disappointed.
Mhm.
affected. Yeah. But look, I'm not saying that every designer needs to get an MBA. Wouldn't hurt, but you don't need to do that. And I'm not saying that every designer needs to um, um, be a capitalist and extract the most money they can from their stuff. That's a personal decision as to what
Mhm.
everybody needs from a
Yeah.
money and income perspective. But what I am saying is that what you do is powerful. What you do is valuable. And
Mhm.
don't be afraid to talk about it. Don't be afraid to learn about it. Don't be afraid to put a higher number on that invoice than you feel comfortable with. Because I promise you, it's still going to be lower than what the client is probably willing to pay. I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, lower than what the highest point of what the client is willing to pay. I think we just have to be proud and honest that what we do is valuable and matters. Because look, if even if a designer thinks this is art and I'm practicing my art for companies, okay, but look at the art world. The art world has no problem
Yeah.
building an economic model around art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why galleries exist.
Right.
That's why Sotheby's exists. It's right. Why are we the ones who don't believe we should worry about the economic value of what we do? So
Mhm.
I think, look, there's just basic stuff. Like if you're going to go freelancing or if you're going to start your own thing, just learn the basics about pricing. Because I
Yeah.
think a lot of designers are uncomfortable in that conversation and they're uncomfortable approaching it because pricing, you think, is math. It's not. Price is a number you put on something. Pricing is the creative logic you build around it to justify that price. And the more that you learn about pricing, the more you'll realize it's actually a creative discipline.
Mm.
It's actually a creative discipline very, very similar to design. And number two is it'll make you much, much more comfortable putting down a number you feel you deserve
Hmm.
because you can talk about it, you can defend it. And it's not a huge learning curve to get into that world. Just pick up one book. Even
Yeah.
if you read just one book, you'll have enough to start capturing your economic value.
Absolutely.
I think that's great advice because I think as creatives, that can be a barrier. So I think that is great advice. I was curious if you would recommend how would be the best way to price things if it's reading a book. Is it reaching out to people you know in your circle that you trust, or curious from yourself how you kind of
So I came to it because
came knowledgeable in that.
I came to it because I was ignorant about pricing and I was
Mhm.
uncomfortable having conversations around it. And so
Yeah.
my mode as an individual is if I'm uncomfortable about something, I want to learn everything I can about it because that evaporates and burns off the fear and anxiety around it. And with anything, you realize, oh, it's actually a lot simpler than you think. I don't have to be an expert on it to be able to do the practice. And I think that's what a lot of people are worried about. I can, again, like I said, read one book. But look, I think the most important thing is for people to remember people are not price sensitive. they're value conscious. If you are uncomfortable putting a number down for salary, for a price on a proposal, it is because you're not conscious of your full value. You don't know how to articulate it. So that number feels high relative to what you're putting down. Same thing for a person who might potentially pay you. If they think that number is too high that you gave them, it's because they don't see the value in that number. They don't think they're going to get more value relative to what they're going to pay. So what pricing teaches you is how to increase the willingness to pay through just communication, through just the way you present stuff, through the way that you structure an argument. And all of a sudden, if you can do that, the willingness to pay goes up and you can charge a higher price. You can charge way more than you ever thought you could. You could start charging for stuff you gave away for free for years because you thought people weren't going to pay for it. And all of a sudden you realize, no, people will pay for it. I just didn't package it that way. So there's lots of books on this. I would advise anyone to just go look at a bunch of books, find one that interests you because it has a good byline, and just start reading there. Just follow your interest in the space rather than starting with a specific book, I tell you.
Great
That's
advice.
awesome.
I'm just being conscious of time here, and
Yes.
I'm going to edit this part out. But Brooke, do you want to just maybe
Yeah.
hop to the last question
I
there?
know,
and
I
then
feel
we can
like-
just- yeah, this flew by.
I feel like we could keep talking for hours here. But something that we're asking each guest that comes on the Memo podcast is that if you could write one memo to the younger version of yourself, what would you say?
The thing that I would write to myself is, what would I write? Here's what I'd write to myself. Take bigger risks earlier. There is, when you're young and earlier in your career, I think there can, and this is what happened to me, you can have a bit of a um, um, fake it till you make it type of mind, a bit of like, I'm insufficient for the role. I got to keep learning. I got to keep trying. I got to put myself in positions where I'm just getting a little bit better, a little bit better. There's nothing wrong with that. Like that's a growth mindset. And I think a lifetime of learning is really, really important. But when you put yourself in moments of bigger risk taking, like joining a startup, starting your own company earlier, taking on a big project inside a company that you have no idea how to do, that's when you get the most asymmetric upside of learning. That's when you can also have the most potential asymmetric upside of just, and I'm using the term generically, profit. Not just monetary profit, but also profit in your life, profit in your confidence, profit in your learning, profit in unique skills that you develop and stuff. I took a very bookish approach, probably as you can tell from the way that I talk. Early in my career, it was just all about reading. It was all about exposing myself to lots and lots of different disciplines. Again, there's value in that, but I wish I had sprinkled in some more risk taking because the downside of risk is a lot smaller, particularly earlier in your career than you might think.
That's amazing.
That's great.
I agree.
Well, I think that concludes today's conversation. Just want to say a huge thank you, Leland, for sharing all of the wisdom with us today. I think that there was lots of gold nuggets here, and it was an honor to get to talk to you again and to speak with you today. We are so excited to have you at Memo Creative Festival, October 2nd and 3rd. And just, yeah, looking forward to that, and hope you have a great rest of your summer, and we will see you in the fall.
Great. Thanks, Sean. I was
Yeah.
really happy to be here. Thank you for all the questions.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
All right. Bye.